MARYBETH Carter is a clinical psychologist and Jungian analyst with offices in both West LA and Palm Springs. She teaches Jungian psychology at Antioch University's Master's in Counseling program and also at Pacifica Graduate Institute's Depth Psychology doctoral program. She has co-edited a book that will be published by Routledge later this year entitled The Specter of the Other in Jungian Psychoanalysis, Political, Psychological, and Sociological Perspectives. MARYBETH is keenly interested in the creative arts, transcendent states, and the process of individuation. She has published the following articles that might be of interest to those of you who are present here today. Painting Transcendence, a Jungian lens on the work of Hilma af Klint. Crystallizing the Universe in Geometrical Figures, Diagrammic Abstraction in the Creative Works of Hilma af Klint and C.G. Jung. And the third article is Painting an Especially Bright Spirit, a Jungian lens on the art of Agnes Pelton. I'm sure she could give us, some information on how to find those articles. I know MARYBETH, and in fact, we both trained at the C.G. Jung Institute in Los Angeles. I was a little ahead of her. We shared offices in West LA. We were right next door to each other for a while. I watched her go through the training program. I know her to be, a very intelligent and compassionate and creative person. She was already a seasoned psychotherapist before entering the training program. And it was sweet for me to watch her, go through it and then become certified several years after me. So it's a pleasure. It's my pleasure to present and introduce her to you all. MARYBETH Carter.
Thank you, Rich. It's been wonderful to share this journey alongside you and see your journey from California to New Mexico now, but still with us in Los Angeles as well. So it's really great to keep this connection. Thank you so much for that nice introduction. And those articles that were mentioned, those are available in Jung Journal, the San Francisco Journal. You're there. If you, the LA Institute has a full-time librarian, and if you were to contact the LA Institute, even though they're in the San Francisco Jung Journal, the LA librarian probably could get you a link to a copy or send you a PDF of those. So just contact, I think it's librarian at librarian at younginla.org. Maybe Lisa could write that, or we'll put it in the chat later. All right, it's so great to be here. And I'm in Southern California, as you just heard, in Palm Springs. And I just want to acknowledge what Rich shared about the fires. We've been going through our share of fires here in California for the last few years, and it's just devastating. And I'm so sorry it's happening in New Mexico now. So to get started, see here, I'm trying to see all of you. First, it's just wonderful that you're all here. Thank you. So in terms of the process or the overview of today, I'll be lecturing for the first 2 hours, and it'll be mainly a PowerPoint where I'll be reading narration and then, commenting as we go along. There'll be a break about at an hour, a little before or after, just kind of see where there's a natural break. And we'll take a break about 15 minutes so you can get some coffee and walk around a bit, and then we'll resume. And I'll be sure to tell you the time. We're kind of off and resuming. And then also, the second portion, then I'll continue presenting. And then somewhere in there, after I finish the presentation, and I'm going to be going through the images. There's going to be a lot of images and of Klint's paintings, 2 series you're going to hear mainly about. And then we'll do question and answer. And I'm sure a lot of you, might have things to share as well. I definitely want to hear it because, there's all of us are finding out more about her work. And I always learn from those who are in the audience as well. And then, towards in the last hour, there might be more questions. I'm not sure exactly where that cutoff point will be. But then the way we'll wrap it up is I'll go through the 2 images, the 2 series again, and we'll just slowly go through the images where you could comment or just take it in. And I like to end with the images because they're so powerful. And that so that you take away that in your mind with this. So let's see. All right. So what I'd like to do first is just have you can keep your eyes open or closed, but I just like let's just take a breath together, a couple breaths. We just heard about some news, right, that you're aware of, but just to bringing it fresh in here today, right, into our gathering here. We're all interconnected. And let's just breathe. Because so much of the work of this artist and of Carl Jung, right, it's about processes of consciousness, but also being in the body, that there's a mind-body link. It's all part of a continuum for each of us individually, and then between all of us in the world and with the world, that we're part of the world, part of the universe, and connected with the psyche. And just while you're breathing, I'm just going to read you a quote from Hilma of Klint, and maybe just see how it resonates for you, and then I'll start my presentation. She wrote, "In this moment, I'm aware, living as I do in this world, that I am an atom in the universe, possessing infinite possibilities of development, and I want to explore these possibilities." So that was her insight and her yearning. We often talk about yearning in Jungian work, right? We yearn as we prospectively are pulled forward in our individuation. I'm just going to read it one more time, because I think it's true for all of us. That's why we're here today, and our interest in this woman and this work. In this moment, I'm aware, living as I do in this world, that I am an atom in the universe, possessing infinite possibilities of development, and I want to explore these possibilities. So today I'm talking about Hilma af Klint and her art, especially her two series of paintings she created that are entitled The 10 Largest and The Swan. And I'll go into more detail about both of these. So I'm going to share my screen now. She did not paint this. I have this here because the swan is a really important animal in Swedish mythology, just history and that. So it holds significance in her work because she does this series called The Swan that we're going to see. And you'll see, but I didn't think it's important to look at this because at the time that Hilma came forward, there was a neo-romantic resurgence, and there was an emphasis on the hero and as the feminine, as the joining as with the hero to support the hero. And Hilma's work was really focused on more ideas of equality, freedom, emancipation. And so you'll see how then she takes this concept and restylizes it through her ideas and thought. She's often depicted as living a very isolated life, but in fact, she lived in Stockholm for over 20 years with a studio right in the center of a very bustling neighborhood where coffee shops and gathering places. So she was very, even though she spent a lot of time alone in her studio, as artists often do, she was engaged and, impacted and impacting others. But then towards the end of her life, when she was taking care of her mother, and then she was given places to live, other parts of Sweden, by friends who built places for her to continue her painting. She did live a more isolated life. In response to her prompts of her inner figures, she devoted her life to the study of interiority, the world around her, including the transpersonal and the evolution of consciousness and of humankind. And in doing so, Hilma af Klint, like Jung, explored the transformative nature of the dialectical aspect of the psyche. So as you'll see in the paintings I show you today, the concepts of duality, transformation, and individuation are constant themes in her art. She strives to depict how holding the tension of the opposites, from which Jung theorized the concept of the transcendent function, that there's a way when these opposing aspects are held closely together, that a third emerges, something new is evoked through an incredibly and often grueling process, yet transformation and change. We have no idea how long it takes until the third emerges, if ever, right? It's not a guarantee. However, with the emergence of the third or this something more, something new, the transpersonal is evoked and a qualitative change occurs that impacts our sense of self in the world. This is that something more that Jung asserted will arise when we hold this tension of duality. He said the psyche is not just this or just that. It's not just consciousness or unconsciousness, but the two together. But when the images and the figures of the two come together, the psyche is also what it has made between the two and something more. And he emphasized this. We know this something because we generate symptoms and images that are symbols that have meaning. Eros, generated through the vitality of the libido, transforms an individual's psyche that becomes not only something evolved, but continually evolving and creative. That's Jung. So despite or because of the suffering inherent in the experience of these oppositional dynamics, psychological breakthroughs are forged. And when this third emerges a unity from the seeming separateness emerges, and we have this incredible breakthrough or new sense of self, and sensed as rebirth. This third state is sometimes called the androgyny, right? Androgen, which is often depicted in image as the union of the male and the female, valued in alchemy as the hermaphrodite. We call it the experience of conjunctio. And as we know in Jungian psychology, this concept and its image suggests an integration of polarized aspects that brings a state of equilibrium between the conscious and the unconscious aspects. So how does one communicate about and portray such a significant process and state of being, right? It's really hard to even put it in words. We often talk about, we use poetry or literature, we try to express the experience. But Hilma af Klint and Jung did so in part by utilizing geometrical diagrams or geometrical abstraction to tell a story of their insights in the form of universal mathematical forms. I'm going to get into this today. So here's a painting that Hilma, I'm going to call her Hilma. I keep saying af Klint, but I guess I've spent so much time with her, just really resonate with her. So she was taught traditional painting. She painted all her life. She grew up in a family of cartographers. She actually, her first 10 years of her life, she lived in a naval academy in Sweden with her family. So she was surrounded by this, and they had generations of cartographers, map makers, right? And she was not only went to school, but she was taught mathematics and more at home by her father. And he also encouraged her painting. So just, I'm going to keep reading. You can look at this as one of her landscapes. The Guggenheim, where I first saw her show, was an exceptional space for this exhibit. So what happened was I was in training as a candidate, and I had applied for a job to run a counseling program that was based in Los Angeles, but they were based internationally, or their influence and services were international. So one of their board members was based in New York City. And so they had the interviews for the job in New York. And so I was like, great, I'll go to New York. I haven't been there since I was 16. So this was in 2019. And it was 2018, 2019. And no, 2019. And so I started, telling people I've got this trip planned to New York. And they said, well, while you're there, you should go see this art exhibit at the Guggenheim. And I was like, oh, okay, who is it? And they go, Hilma af Klint, it's really great. And she's a great artist. And I had never heard of her. I had never been to the Guggenheim. And I'd only been to New York when I was 16 as part of a class trip and when I was a junior in high school. So I said, okay, so I scheduled an extra day. And so I went and I had my interview, which went really well, but I decided to decline the position and just keep pursuing, trying to build my practice at the time and continue with training. But then I went to the exhibit at the Guggenheim, which was the first time a complete show of her work was available in the United States. I'm gonna go here. This is Hilma in her art studio. So I'm talking about this. So stepping from the entrance into the museum's central area, I was immediately in view of a magnificent spiral staircase in the Guggenheim, which was created by Frank Lloyd Wright. And the spiral staircase beckoned us to begin walking up the parameter of the space. And then as you went around all of her paintings, you just kept going up the spiral and all of her paintings. And I've got some photos in here I'll be showing you. It beckoned us towards her paintings and drawings. And there's an incredible parallel I just want to share with you about the Guggenheim's 1959 design of a circular building with a sweeping interior spiral staircase. And Hilma af Klint also received a vision of a temple to be built. It was never been built, but she made the blueprint for it. That would have a spiral staircase that connected 4 floors to provide an experiential encounter as one walked up the staircase to view the more than 193 works she had created. She completed the architectural rendering of the temple in 1931. This would be an alabaster temple with a central area that went up to open up to the sky. And when she made this rendering, it was 1 year after MARYBETH, an artist and guide to Solomon R. Guggenheim, that MARYBETH helped Guggenheim acquire his abstract art collection that's in the Guggenheim. She proposed the creation of a circular building in New York City to house this abstract collection. So that's just another really interesting parallel. And so then to have it that it was designed with this circular in the Guggenheim, and then to see her art surround, as you went up, it had such a parallel and with this concept that Hilma received about her temple, the temple. So some background, okay. A contemporary of Carl Jung, Hilma af Klint was born in 1862 and she died in 1944. So in comparison, Jung was born in 1875, so about 13 years after her, and he died in 1961, so just short of 20 years after her. She was a Swedish artist who formerly trained at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Stockholm. She was in they say now the second class of women who are allowed to study art with the male students. Previous to that, only male students could study at the academy. She graduated with honors, and because she did so well, she was provided the studio that you see in this photo. And as I showed you, her initial work tended toward landscapes, portraits, and botanical illustrations, which she regularly exhibited in shows with other women artists. What I found out is that, especially for, quote, aristocratic class women in Sweden at the time, many of them started to not marry. And so if they were not married, their older brothers were responsible for their financial upkeep. And so this trend then to allow women, these particular women, to be able to train in the field of art, it was thought then they could at least make a living or at least have some income. And, it worked in the sense of, like Hilma and many others, like she illustrated children's books, she made botanical drawings, she did some illustrations for veterinarians, of surgeries and things like that. And again, you can see this inheritance of the cartography, right, with her ability to draw that was part of her family lineage, right? And then she was able to bring it to this. And even in this, look, if you look closely at this photo, right, you see these landscapes and such on the wall beside her. But what was so interesting then was for most of her life, she painted abstract works for which she is now famous. You know, ironically, during her lifetime, exhibitors declined to show her abstracts, despite her repeated attempts to get them shown. Some of her family members and female peers consider her abstract art to be offensive. They'd never seen anything like it before. And even she became, during art school, and later when she was in her studio, time during her studio of her art, she became very involved with theosophy. And theosophy is this idea was founded by Helena Blavatsky, and it was very, took hold in the US, Europe, and India. And so it was founded in 1875. And it was two key concepts. There's a lot more, but I'm not going to get into theosophy in depth today. But just one is there's a sense of mystical experience and divine wisdom, and also that all world religions contain this like mystic level that you can connect to. So Rudolf Steiner was a member of the theosophy movement, and then he later created his own version of theosophy. He left theosophy and started his own movement, as I say. But he would travel then, and he came to her studio, and she showed him her abstracts, and he just thought she shouldn't show them to anybody. So what's really interesting is at the time that she's alive, at the time that she's alive, Mondrian, Kandinsky, and F. Klint were all alive at the same time. And they all died in the year 1944, all three of them. Just interesting, right? I don't know what meaning to make from that, but it's very interesting. And then there's a letter from Kandinsky to like the powers that be of the art world. I think it was the New York Museum of Modern Art. And he, his first abstract was in 1911. And he asked that it be noted that this is the first true abstract painted, at least in the Western world. And so and they acknowledge that. And so it goes through our history that he's seen as like the father of abstract art, or the founder or the originator of abstract art. But as you're going to hear about today, all of Hilma af Klint's work was kept at her nephew's home after she died. And again, no one would let it be viewed or show it at art shows. And so, but if we go back, you see her abstracts started, the very first one was in 1906. So, and when Steiner came to her studio here, he took photos, and then he went to visit Kandinsky. So there's an inference now that perhaps Kandinsky was influenced by Hilma af Klint's work, but there's no acknowledgement. And because she wasn't shown, then, he was given that title. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of chewing on this in the art world, but that's not our focus today. It's just a piece of content for us. Our content is going to be more around consciousness and these, looking and enjoying her art. But it is, I think, important in terms of how this developed. So, yeah, I think it's really something, like people see the abstract art. Even, we know Jung even just didn't have the best reaction to abstract art itself, right? He thought it was disorganized in the sense of, it wasn't his favorite either. So it was, it's something new that emerged, and it took a while for us to settle into it as humans. So Steiner also thought that Hilma af Klint should not use mediumship as a method for painting. And no one should see her art for at least 50 years. She didn't write in her notebooks why. And her family has her notebooks. And there's more than 25,000 pages of notes in her notebooks that she carefully recorded of her work when she worked as a medium. And I'm going to talk more about that, where she would have seances and get information from spirit guides, and also her thoughts on, what they told her. So that is still, like, I think we're going to be hearing so much for decades, going forward. And of course, she's Swedish, so she wrote in Swedish language. And so getting all of that first into even books in Swedish, and then much less translated, so that those of us who speak the English language can read it. But we don't know, she didn't really know why, but she did interact with him several times trying to get her artwork shown as Steiner's buildings in Switzerland. And he just repeatedly said no, he would not let her paintings be viewed. So at the end of her life, she stored it all at her nephew's home with strict instructions to not sell her art or show it for 20 years, until 20 years after her death, which would have been then the 1960s, right? But her nephew, he wasn't an artist, and he and his wife, they're raising their family, and he was, in the naval business and cartography, as was their lineage. And so it wasn't until his son grew up, and his son's like poking around in the house and says, "Dad, what are these crates? What is this stuff we've got here?" And he goes, "Oh, it's your Aunt Hilma's stuff, paintings and stuff. She wanted me to keep it. I don't know what to do with it." And it was her great nephew then, who then really started to work and unpack what was there. And they've established a family foundation. And the first posthumous showing of her work were 2 abstract paintings that were part of an exhibit at the LA County Museum of Art, which is LACMA, in 1985. So 41 years after her death. That's why it feels so current now. I know that was almost 30 years ago, but it's really just taken the last few decades where her stuff's been unpacked, the family foundation set up, and then, really starting to work with the art world about her pieces. Since then, her remarkable art has been shown in various locations, including the Guggenheim, New York, which broke the museum's record as the most highly attended exhibit in its history. Right? So this is a photo of an altar that was in her studio. And you see here the picture of Jesus and crosses and that. That's here. Seances and a connection to the transpersonal really greatly influenced Hilma af Klint and Jung as well. In 1879, af Klint began participating in seances. By 1880, she had also become interested in theosophy and spiritualism. And spiritualism is when making contact, this belief that you can make contact with spirits of the dead in disembodied form. It's very popular with artists, even like at the art academy, that even the teachers would engage in this. They would do seances. And I kind of liken it to like how popular mindfulness meditation is today in our world. Like, it's very popular. This was really popular at the time, spiritualism. So this is a practice where participants communicate with spirits of the dead with an intent to unite the natural and the supernatural realms and to bring the dead into conversation with the living. Once she had her studio, she formed a group of 5 women called the Femme, or 5, who regularly engaged in trance work. The trance experiences manifested dialogue and images, including several distinct spirit personalities, as well as some that collectively called themselves the High Ones. Alternatively, she called these personalities her guides. They met regularly, this group of 5 women, artists, to evoke trance states that induce visions and communications with the guides, and they used automatic drawing and journal writing. In 1904, one of the spirits, Amaliel, so that Amaliel is the spirit in the middle here. So this is a drawing that Hilma did of 3 of the spirit guides, how they appear to her as images in her mind to communicate, and how they communicated with her and the others. In 1904, one of the spirits, Amaliel, extended an invitation to the group, an art commission of a sense, that would use the process of automatic painting. So automatic painting is a process involving a deep spiritual state where, you know, the person goes into a meditation and basically sets aside their ego sense of I, right, as much as possible, and allows then movement, a flow to come through them. And there's no intentionality like, oh, I'm going to draw this star, you know, it's just allowing the hand to move, and then see what emerges, right? Each of the women in the group of 5 declined the offer, and they declined the offer because they had a deep fear of going mad, of going psychotic. But Hilma of Klint said, I accept, I accept. She spent 12 months cleansing, eating a vegetarian diet, and preparing to engage in this special task. And doing these things, as one can imagine, perhaps you have this in your own family, the special diet, the vegetarianism, she was purifying herself, you know. Her family wasn't too happy about this. They were just like, what are you doing, you know? But she persisted for a year and then began to engage with this, which again, I'll show you what she created, her first images. When she engaged for 9 years, from 1906 to 1915, all of the art she produced during that time, which like I said, is 193 paintings, she did through automatic painting, this process, where she would go into like a trance-like state and just allow whatever to emerge. And then from these original paintings, especially in the first year, she painted like 3 paintings, a painting every 3 days. I mean, just think about that. Yeah. So, then after 1915, she didn't do the automatic painting anymore, but she studied what had been shared with her from the spirit guides. And then she painted more until the end of her life, just trying to expound more thoroughly on what she had learned in order to really deepen into her work with it. So this is all going on, and it starts, you know, so we're saying she started doing this, right, with the seances while she was in school around 1880. And then in 1898, 16 years after she began attending seances and engaging with trance states, Carl Jung was attending seances while in medical school. In fact, he probably participated at an even earlier age because his mother and cousin functioned as mediums for seances in his home. And he recounts paranormal incidents that occurred during his childhood in his book, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, right? Most of us have read that, and he does go into detail there. His interest in the supernatural, including participation in seances, lasted for at least 30 more years. I'm kind of think about it as being just part of his early life, but he continued to express interest in this. And as we know, he wrote his doctoral dissertation on a case study of a medium who we now know was his cousin, and hypothesized that the deceased spirits that contacted this medium were not spirits of deceased people, but were the subconscious split off parts of the medium's psyche, which he called complexes. Right? Later on, he kept developing this thought about the psyche and complexes and that. And he posited that the psyche might not be a closed system, that it might not be just what is split off and or, different parts of the unconscious and collective unconscious and different aspects of the individual psyche, saying, yes, those parts are interconnected. But he also, in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, has a little section towards the end where he wrote, it might be that that there's something more that we connect with as well, that's beyond just our individual psyche. He said it might not be a closed system, and he suggested that the psyche may also contain parts from unknown parts, and the parts we might make a connection to some sense of something beyond our own individual psyche, from the unconscious to consciousness, that could spark a transcendent function and create numinous contact with a multidimensional trans-psychic realm. He wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, all comprehension, show this here, and all that is comprehended is in itself psychic, and to that extent, we're hopelessly cooped up in an exclusively psychic world. Okay? But nevertheless, we have good reason to suppose that behind this veil, there exists the uncomprehended absolute object, which affects and influences us, and to suppose it even, or particularly in the case of psychic phenomenon, about which no verifiable statements can be made. So what he's saying, he's saying that we might not just be a cooped up, closed system. So here we hold two ways of viewing this experience, right? Hilma af Klint regarded her trance states as being connections to spirits, yet through a Jungian lens, they might be psychic complexes, right? And then there is Jung, who towards the end of his life and during his whole life, right, regarded his inner figures as psychic complexes and archetypes, yet allowed for the possibility towards the end of his life that an uncomprehended dynamism may exist beyond the veil of the psychic world. Not being versed in psychology and with depth psychology in its infancy at the time, af Klint would not have had a paradigm other than spirituality for categorizing her experience to this unknown, or the artistic creativity it evoked. She had a unique approach to the figures she drew and the meaning they provided. And as if anticipating or already receiving criticism of her method, which was to go into these trance state to receive these images and allow them to flow through her body to her arm, to her hand, to the paper, she wrote in her journal in the early 1900s, "It was not the case that I was to blindly obey the high lords of the mysteries, but that I was to imagine that they were always standing by my side. Through visions, imaginations, and this inner voice, she painted multiple series until she died at age 82 in a car accident." So we know the parallel with Hilma af Klint, with her guides, are figures that Jung met during his confrontation with the unconscious, right? Which we now know produced the Black Books and the Red Book. Right? And Jung in particular had a relationship with this figure of Philemon, with whom he maintained a relationship throughout his life. People would say they would see, he would be, especially in Bollingen, pacing outside under a tree and talking to, having a whole conversation with Philemon. And Jung wrote, Philemon and my other figures of my fantasies brought home to me the crucial insight that there are things in the psyche which I do not produce, but which produce themselves and have their own life. Philemon represented a force which was not myself. In my fantasies, I held conversations with him, and he said things which I had not consciously thought. For I observed clearly that it was he who spoke and not I. So similar to Hilma af Klint, Jung engaged in automatic drawing of mandalas, as well as one known instance of automatic writing, with the material dictated to Jung by a figure from the archetypal realm who identified himself as a Gnostic named Basilides, that led to the teachings called the 7 Sermons of the Dead. So Jung wrote all of that whole piece, the 7 Sermons of the Dead, through automatic writing. So I'm just showing here these parallels of what was going on at the time, and they're overlapped with Hilma af Klint in Sweden, but she did travel to Switzerland, and then with Jung in Switzerland, but also going to Germany and other places. Here is an image of the Guggenheim when you first entered to see the exhibit of her work, and you see the circular space, and it's called Hilma af Klint, the Paintings for the Future. Here's a sense of it as you wound around to see these images displayed. You can start to see the size. There's some really large size and small ones. Up here you see there's a series of small ones. I have these large ones, medium size. I'm going to stop here. We're going to take a break. I'm going to stop share for a second. I teach a lot, but part of the way I can do this is I love to hear, like, everybody doing okay, like thumbs up, or I see hand figures. Everyone's okay. Okay, great. So we're going to take a break. It's 10:02. So let's come back at 10:15.
Hi, everyone. You can start coming back into the room. We'll begin again. Ready when you are, Mary Beth.
Okay, thank you. All right. Hope everyone had a good break. I'd like to do is just, let's get back into the room together again and take another breath, deep breath. I'm going to read some more quotes from Hilma af Klint. She wrote, I want to acquire real insights about our existence on Earth in relation to the center of the universe. Those granted the gift of seeing more deeply can see beyond form and connect on the wondrous aspect hiding behind every form, which is called life. What I needed was courage, and it was granted to me through the spiritual world, which bestowed rare and wonderful instruction. She wrote, accept, Hilma, accept, Hilma, the Spirit says to her. Then a wonderful energy would flow from the heavenly into the earthly. The Spirit told her, Hilma, you were brought here to do this. Just to give you, again, some more context, which is important at this time to understand this. I know for our group, we're more open to this, but again, these ideas of spiritualism or spirits, we know in many cultures, there's a whole relationship between the spirit world and the living on earth world and that, but so much as we know in the Western dominant culture that is not viewed as okay, and it's looked upon with skepticism. And in fact, when Hilma's family started unpacking her art, they turned to one of the local galleries in Stockholm and said, please, would you, we'll give you this. They were going to give them the whole collection. They were like, here, take it. And when they found out that she did her art through mediumship, they said, we don't want to display any of it. So even after she's dead, 40 some years later, after she's passed away, so during her lifetime and after, no one wanted to show her work. And even now it's seen as, there's controversy as, is it really art or is it spiritual drawings? And of course, there's quite a few who are saying it's art and others who criticize it as not being art because she didn't do it intentionally, at least these paintings that we're going to see first intentionally. But part of what was going on at the same time of this, that all this was emerging, just to give some context, in 1889, we discovered radio waves. In 1895, we discovered X-rays. In 1896, the atom, we were able to divide the atom that was dividable. In 1897, electrons were discovered. In 1897, radioactivity was able to be tracked. In 1900, quantum physics theory emerged, which is about that the particle and the wave both occur, are both simultaneous, and that there's a subjective element to our experience of life. In 1905, the theory of relativity was put forward. And so this sense that there's an invisible world that we can't see, that we know that, our chair or our table is made up of atoms that are reverberating, right? But it consolidates into an object that we see as a chair. But also this sense of the invisible world of spirits, that there was these veils, that there was life all amongst us. There's radio waves and other light waves, coursing through the air that we don't see, sound waves and all this. So it was a very exciting time because you can imagine all of this is emerging, and some artists were really interested in portraying it. And Hilma af Klint was very interested in exploring it. So let me show you some more. So these images I'm showing you are called the 10 largest. The paintings are called the 10 largest. And I'll be telling you some more about this, but I just want to, let's see here. This shows you scale, right? Very large. Now, this is a photo I took at the Guggenheim. It was pretty great to just hang out with these paintings. All right. So both Carl Jung and Hilma af Klint used these different, mandalas, geometrical figures, other non-representational images to try to convey, as well as words, of course, Jung used words as well, but, ways to try to convey these concepts of the prospective movement of the self, right? Jung called individuation. And in order to also just show psychological states as well, right? They selected the circle, one of many forms of geometric diagram, often expressed in their concepts as mandalas, right? And when af Klint began the automatic painting of the cycle of paintings called the Paintings for the Temple, she was told that she was a pioneer and needed to utilize an uncomprehended working method. This was in 1908. Well, that's when she wrote it, but she actually made these in 1906. She wrote in her journal about the process in the following way. The pictures were painted directly through me without any preliminary drawings. So like, here's one of them right here I'm showing. This is one of the 10 largest. So no preliminary drawing. And she was just to go into this state, allow her hand to move, and this is what she drew. She said, they came through me with great force. I had no idea what the paintings were supposed to depict. Nevertheless, I worked swiftly and surely without changing a single brushstroke. So she painted each of these 10, like I said, in 4 days. In addition to the circle, more complex geometrical forms emerged during her automatic painting sessions. And especially we're going to see in the 2 paintings called Old Age, geometric forms depict states of consciousness that have evolved for the individual over a lifetime. So it's showing potentiality. Both Jung and af Klint, like alchemists before them, propose that this process of development emerges from a rhythm of polarity that resolves in an integrated new state. That is what we talked about, the third. And they use symbols of the spiral, snails. We see the spiral here down on the left, this pink area here, spirals, eggs, ideas of snails, organic forms. And then here is like a flower petal, but this is also in a way a mandala of its own, right? And here's circles, different. So the first series that emerged is called the 10 largest, and they represent the 4 stages of life and humanity's connection to the universe. They were painted, she was commissioned to paint these, and they would, if the temple that she was given, the design for, they would have been on the walls, just like you saw at the Guggenheim when I showed you that these would have been these 10 paintings as you walked in and started to go up the staircase, then these would have been reflected back to you. You would have seen these, and it was to stir your consciousness about the prospective aspect of life. So this series parallels Jung's concept of individuation, which he defined as the development of consciousness out of the original state of identity, the extension of the sphere of consciousness, and an enriching of conscious psychological life. The paintings are tempera on paper mounted on canvas. Each of the 10 paintings is greater than 8 foot by 7 foot, as you saw. Standing 5 foot tall, Hilma painted these larger than life paintings by laying the canvases on the ground. And they say that she was one of the first artists to paint this size and using the method where you put the canvas on the ground. Each painting took 4 days. And as you say, flower images that double as mandalas, like this, we see this, celebrate the division of one. And these, you can see here, the Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3. And then here would be the 4th, right? So if we think about the axiom of Maria that the alchemists use, from the 1 becomes the 2, into the 3, which becomes the 4th. Now, she didn't write, Hilma of Klint didn't write the axiom of Maria, but I'm just bringing that in as a parallel of what we know, how important that was for Jung in his work. So the axiom of Maria is often written as the dynamic unfolding from unconsciousness to the emergence of one-sided consciousness, to the cognition of the opposites of the consciousness and unconscious, right? And finally, to the integration into a new conscious attitude. The number 7 is repeated throughout the series. And you can see that in the youth paintings, the snails, and then I want to show here. So here you see these snails. So this is one is youth with the orange background. See these eggs. Number 7. But the snail often represents individuation or growth, right? Consciousness, the squiggles and that. And this next one, this is adulthood. And here you see down in here the syllable wu, W-U, which for her was code for male and female together. So again, it was about the opposites coming together in the one. Like I said, at the last part of today, in the final hour, we'll go through all these and you can comment on, you can share and talk, but right now I just want you to just take it in and look at the forms. Again, this is all automatic painting. This is the final painting of the series, Old Age. It's a little more faded, which I think we lose a little of our vibrancy as we age, right? But also there's this sense of something constellated at that point that's going to transition through the event we call death. Also the sense of mandalas. So we have, and then there's more than one for each, like there's several like childhood, youth, old age. So there's 2 that are old age. So this is the first one. And then this is the last one of old age. Again, you see here then the geometric figure of the square. You also see there's 4, the number 4. We know that's really important. We just talked about it in the axiom of Maria. And also the cross, right? Which is an ancient symbol that predates Christianity. But of course, is a very important part of Christianity. The art historian Ryle wrote that Hilma's art innovates a political diagrammatic abstraction centered on gender equality and androgyny. Remember, I talked at the very beginning about the neo-romanticism that had come back into Sweden and many parts of Europe at that point. And she, Hilma had joined, here she is out as a young woman. And then of course, as she's aging as a woman in society. And she's involved with theosophy, and they promoted women as well as female and male leaders. Women could be leaders in their movement, as well as they held the position for the abolition of slavery and also women's suffrage, that women should have the right to vote. So you start to see where she's trying to bring more abstraction or ways to depict things that are more sense of equality or more freedom or more access, and not caught in some of these other narratives that were going on in the culture at the time. The practice of trances and spiritualism helped her connect with a sense of other and evoked a transpersonal experience that resonated with her quest for a new cultural, socio-political perspective for her time. She sought a greater understanding of the feminine, the masculine, and their relationship in the concept of duality and transformation. In this way, we might understand the emergence of her art and as an expression of the dual nature of a cultural complex. Right? Jung wrote that visionary art provides a compensatory function to the time in which it is produced. And it is the role of consciousness to have a relationship with this unconscious. And we know that artists are often the ones who tap into that unknowingly. She had no idea she was letting it flow through her. She didn't preconceive it. So in painting number 10, it's easy to imagine that a new state of being is achieved and a new psychological state is depicted as being able to be achieved by anyone, and it's genderless, right? Anyone could have this experience. The white blocks that form a cross and the color blocks that form a quaternity or suggest dynamic wholeness, not stasis. And why is that? Well, because in Mysterium, Jung stressed that the quaternion and the cross are alternate forms of the circle. The circle, a geometric symbol of the self, revolves continuously between duality and union, death and rebirth, creation and resolution. So actually in this painting, if you think about the cross, which is if you start to have a cross turn, if it started turning to the right in your mind, it becomes a wheel, right? And it becomes a circle. So the circle and the cross and the square are always intertwined. And that's why they often emerge in mandalas. And for Jung, the mandala represented the self. So we could imagine in this painting that she's suggesting a state of dynamic consciousness. And like I said, that this would be preceding that event we call death. So now I'm just going to be quiet. I'm just going to click through the 10 largest so you can just experience them. And as I said, in the final hour, we'll come back to these and we can talk about them. But I'm not going to comment on them. I just want you to have an experience of them. Okay. This is a triptych she painted. I spent most of my time standing in front of this. If you look down at the lower part, you can see this is the handrail in front of them. So it gives you a sense of the size. As you went so when you entered the temple, the 10 largest you would be greeted by those and pass by those, and whatever transpersonal or other experiences it might evoke for you. And then as you reached the top of the spiral of the temple, these are at the altar, the top altar. These paintings, the gold part is gold leaf. And they were just spectacular. So I just wanted to share these with you. And here's this one. Okay, so now we're moving from the 10 largest and these altar pieces to then she had worked through the automatic painting. Then in 1915, stopped the automatic painting process and just began, intentionally drawing things to work with these concepts. So I liken that to Jung always repeatedly saying that his experience of the content that came out from when he did the confrontation with the unconscious. And during that time, what evoked from, he said, all the books he wrote stem back to those experiences, him trying to put into words, Jung trying to put into words what his experiences were. And similarly for Hilma of Klint, she had these experiences and then, spent the rest of her life writing in her journals and painting. See. So here we are at the swan. Now, one of the things I like to emphasize, it's not called the swans, plural, it's called the swan. So, because it's about, a process, a psychological process. So the Swan series is 23 paintings. And she painted it in 1914 to 1915 when she was 52 years old. Now, again, some context, I just try to weave back and forth. Jung at this point then would be 39 years old, and he had just published Symbols of Transformation and was having his confrontation with the unconscious at that time. So she had already been doing all this work and now was starting to paint this series. The Swan comprised of 23 paintings of oil on canvas. They're about 5 foot by 5 foot in size. They explore the dynamics of duality, balance, conflict, union, and the evolution of consciousness. As in the 10 largest, of Klint utilized highly abstracted geometric images, which we saw in the final one, Old Age, right? That are what we call diagrammatic. So they're more like diagram-like rather than representation or figure-like, right? The series begins with 2 representations of swans opposing each other, yet having a relatedness, right? Because they're facing each other, they're related, and they touch, right? There's a sense of balance between them that contrasts with the dynamic tension in the painting, including the use of color coding to intentionally gender the forms to create duality and this idea of duality and unity that she keeps playing with. For instance, black and yellow, this one on the bottom, symbolizes the masculine in her coding scheme, and white and blue on top symbolizes the feminine. She was very taken with Goethe's colors. Goethe did a lot of work around color, and she read his writings on it. She then deconstructs and stylizes the two swans. Again, remember that first swan I showed you? These are very different, right? And then she deconstructs them through multiplication, dissolution, and reformulation. In some of the paintings, this is the Swan series, the one on the left. This image on the right is a fractal, an image of a fractal. I just wanted to show the comparison here. So here you can see she's deconstructed the swans. We still have the black and the white, the blue and the yellow. We see these there, the embodied red, right? And these cubes. And when I saw these, I was like, oh, they look like fractals. They have an uncanny resemblance to fractals. That term fractal wasn't coined until 1975. The word fractal is Latin for fractus, means broken or fractured, and conveys the concept of theoretical fractional dimensions to geometric patterns in nature. But she was saying we have geometric fractal patterns in us, in our processes. So it's really incredible to see she painted this in 1915, and this is, more contemporary, just an image of a fractal. The movement of the geometric and organic shapes that in this series called the Swan evokes a sense of wonder in the transformative nature of the sense of being, to be, as they're pulled forward prospectively in a process that results in circles, diagrammatic forms, geometric forms, and then totally become unrepresentational. So in the beginning as swans, as representation, we can look at it and say, that's a swan, right? And by the end, it's unrepresentational in the sense that's abstract, right? Then the final diagram, the final painting, represents the experience of wholeness that resolves into an image of an integrated, embodied representational form, that of the two swans in union, the state of the androgen. Now, this is a painting that Jung did. Isn't that interesting? If we look at here, these figures in here, and then this is one of the mandalas in the Red Book that Jung did. So we again see these fractal-like, right? So here, when we look at the beginning of the Swan series, it's representational, two swans. Goes through, you're going to see several abstract forms like this one on the left. You'll see the whole series. And it resolves in this one on the right. As you see, there's this little image here, and they're connected. You're going to see the previous image. It's like they've internalized it. It's also, I think, interesting to look at the brush strokes, right? Look at this. I mean, this looks, it's been rough, right? They look kind of ruffled. And for any of us who've done any analytic or transformational work, it does feel like we're coming apart into parts, and then hopefully we resolve into something that not this, not that, but unified, but something more, as Jung said. Not this, not that, but something more. The art historian Ryle, it's R-Y-L-E, asserted that the use of the image of the swan, a male-identified symbol and emblem of Sweden's Nordic mythology, is af Klint's reconstruction of the male-dominated culture over time, as she, her sister, and many women worked for suffrage, for the women's right to vote, right, and other forms of freedom for women. Ryle stated that the transformative nature of the swan evokes a political abstractedness that resolves in the balanced cuboid form and symmetrical color arrangements. But what I found out, though, is that it doesn't resolve in an abstract form. At the Guggenheim, it did. The whole series, it ended, and I took photos of everything. I was just walking around. You could photograph everything. It was really great. and it was a geometrical form that I'm going to show you. But then I was flipping through a book about alchemical series written by Henderson and Diane, I think Diane Sherwood. And I saw this image here on the right, and I went, oh, look at those swans. And I go, oh, it's a painting by Hilma af Klint. Oh, did she do, where's that one go? Did she do another series of swans? So I wrote my contact at the Family Foundation, and I said, I took a picture of it and sent it to him. I said, I just found this in a book and I didn't see it at the Guggenheim. I said, did she do another series of swans? And he said, no, that's the final image of the swan series. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that everyone thinks it ends with the more diagrammatical geometric abstraction. And as Jungians, of course, right? We're like, of course, because Jung was always, we must embody, we must, the blood, the red, the rubedo, we have to come back into the body. It can't just be the transcendent state, but it has to come back into the body. We're body-mind connection. And in fact, that's what she depicted in the series, which is so remarkable. So here we see it in alchemy. This idea of this psychological development, right? This is from 1606 and is in, Jung had this in volume 12 of the collected works on psychology and alchemy. And in this figure, the swan here in the middle, and is over this world, right? With these fluids, the sea, and white fluids are in the process of transformation. They're dark and light, right? And represent a mercurial force that can transform the Black Sea in the image through a process of fermentation. Here's a close-up of it. The alchemist posited that fermentation and transformation are mutually connected and evoke the creation of something new. And here we have the sun and the moon, water and air, male and female, above and below, transformation by the swan. Pretty remarkable. This painting on the right is af Klint. Af Klint is part of the Swan series. So her illustrating psychological abstractedness conveys a potential for human development and transformation and evolving states of being, which parallels Jung's description of the process of individuation and ion. Jung realized that mandalas are universally spontaneous patterns of order, and he concluded that if a spontaneously unfolding psychic process is followed to its own logical end and is permitted to express itself fully, the goal of this process will be fulfilled, namely to manifest universal images of order and a unity. He called this goal and the process the self. Jung viewed the self as the prime archetype, the one, from which all other archetypes and archetypal images ultimately derive. The unity is dynamic and is achieved when the entire psychic system becomes more balanced, interrelated, and integrated. In Ion, chapter 14, Structures and Dynamics of the Self, Jung utilized geometric form, specifically the octahedron, to convey the interrelatedness of various aspects that can evoke levels of consciousness of the self. So this is where he's trying to talk about these states of consciousness, and he's using these geometric forms to try to convey it. The octahedron is first found in Plato's writings and represents a space-time quaternion. Leslie Stein wrote, the octahedron as the schema for the psyche's apprehension of the physical world and its representation also as the process for the development of consciousness makes it a perfect symbol for the equation. And so this equation of the prospective movement of the psyche and states of being and consciousness. Jung asserted that there are 4 octahedrons: the anthropos quaternio, the shadow quaternio, paradise quaternity. So anthropos is the initial or end state, initial and end state. Then it goes in a movement towards then the next phase of consciousness would be the shadow, instinctual state. And then the paradise quaternio is harmony, peace, and symmetry. And the 4th is the lapis quaternity, conscious wholeness, which then is interconnected back to the anthropos, or the embodiment of man. And he ends this section talking about the periscope-like cross within a circle. The philosopher's pelican is called. So we've got pelicans and swans. I thought it was pretty close enough, these birds, right? Which Jung stated was the same as a mandala. He integrates the 4 octahedrons then. There's 4 of these into this icosahedron. So here's the 4 we just talked about. And then I turn on the side of this. And here is an image from the Swan series, Hilma off Klint. It's the next to last before those ruffled feather swans we see again that are embodied. But this is the way that she represented through geometric form, the state of being prior to the embodiment again. I just thought, I couldn't believe it. They're not exactly the same. Like there's only 3 here, but perhaps, I don't know, there's 4 here, but I just thought the similarity is uncanny. Jung explained how these tetrahedrons are linked through an equation that moves circularly. He said, the formula presents a symbol of the self. For the self is not just a static quantity or constant form. It is a dynamic process of restoration or rejuvenation taking place, as it were, inside the self. Psyche and matter exist in one and the same world, and each partakes of the other. Otherwise, any reciprocal action would not be possible. He described the progression of the 4 key stages of consciousness attained through integrating the polarized psychic contents depicted through these octahedrons. The quaternity of octahedrons represents the dynamic of becoming by illustrating their connection and rotation from one to the other. Then they meld into the geometrical figure, that icosahedron here, which is a polyhedron with 20 faces. You can memorize that for some kind of game show in the future. I had to learn all this. And it's uncannily similar to the geometric figure painted by Klint. In Jung's icosahedron diagram, the complexity of the self is inferred at yet another level of totality and wholeness through 3-dimensional 6-pointed figures attached end to end with each other. Murray Stein explained the quaternities, squares angled as 3-dimensional 6-pointed figures, touch at the poles of their greatest opposition at the extremes of spirit and matter as dynamic circulation. The 4 octahedrons fuse and become an icosahedron when flipped on its side, and diagrammatically illustrate the Ouroboros, another circular shaped symbol suggesting wholeness or infinity. The octahedrons composing the icosahedron are linked through an equation that moves circularly in an interconnectedness of becoming. And he states here, the formula presents a symbol of the self. I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. For the self is not a static quantity or constant form, but it's a dynamic process of restoration or rejuvenation, just continuously flowing inside the self. For Jung, by attaining experiences of conjunctio, and with the state of conjunctio, a state of lucid consciousness, a gateway is created. And this opening engenders the possibility of an experience of an even more multidimensional aspect of the psyche. Theoretically, encountering and integrating these polarized aspects will lead to further structural changes within the psyche and through the process of an ever-changing consciousness. We see these four. So Jung considered individuation to be the main task of each human life and the centralizing process in the unconscious that forms the personality. Jung was adamant that the assimilation of the unconscious contents by the ego creates beneficial psychic development expressed as various states of consciousness. The benefit stems from the withdrawal of projections from the dualistic opposite, which allows for the greater expansion of the quality of an individual's consciousness that then can relate more fully and with less projection or scapegoating in the world, right? We can bring our fullness of the gifts that we have been born with and cultivated in our relationships and in our relation of our experience of ourselves in the world and with the world. What's comparable in Jung's use of geometric form to represent these dynamic movements and states of consciousness are the diagrammatic geometric forms that Hilma af Klint utilized in her art. She too expressed conceptualizations of consciousness. What is noteworthy is she painted these in 1906 onward, 1915 for the Swan. Jung wrote Ion in the 1940s, which was when she died. Af Klint's work is a unique contribution that deserves recognition. In addition, her life and art provide another context for understanding Jung and that the cultural milieu was evoking a connection to these psycho-spiritual processes. Those who tapped into the unconscious mysteries and who were willing to be a conveyor of that information helped to render these theories and concepts that we've all inherited now. Hilma af Klint and C.G. Jung dedicated their lives to exploring these psychic processes that move us prospectively forward through stages of consciousness. We too are called to personally awaken to these dynamics, to experience consciousness by striving towards wholeness. We then can help to constellate the dynamics with others around us too. So to conclude this section, before we go on break, I'm just going to, again, quietly, without comment, take us through the Swan series. And then we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll have questions. And then in the last part, we'll go through the images again and can comment on them. Okay. Powerful. Let's see, it's 11:01. So when we come back at 10 after, then we'll have questions and discussion and then wrap up with looking at images. So see, for this, Lisa, for this portion, can I just come back and be part of the group?
Yes, you may
Okay.
stop.
Take the spotlight off.
Yes.
Great.
Okay.
Change my view. Great. Oh, it feels better. Okay. So Lisa, you and Rich are gonna call on people, is that right?
Well,
And
why
you'll
don't you
unmute them?
bring people back in and say, to start saying
Okay, we're gonna
questions.
go ahead and get started. We're gonna have questions for about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll look at images again.
Okay, I have a question in the chat. Sarah Sugart, I might be totally butchering that. Sorry, Sarah. She asked, do I understand that the final picture in the Swan series was not in the Guggenheim exhibition? And if not, why not?
Mhm. It was not in the exhibition. I found it afterwards in the book about alchemy by Henderson and Sherwood. I do not know why. That's a good question. I'm gonna write the family and ask and see if they know why. I don't know why. And there's a film about him of Klint. It's called Beyond the Visible, and you could get it through Kino, Kino Films. You can rent it one time for $4.99, or you can quote purchase it, which you only own it like virtually for $9.99. I've probably watched it 6 times. And they show the Swan series, and it doesn't end with this last one. So it was just, one of those things, right? We talk about where I was just reading so much about alchemy and transformational states and how this gets written and depicted when I was working on this paper, and stumbled across that image, and I went, oh, there's some swans again. But it looks so different. I didn't think it was her work. And then I read the caption and it says Hilma af Klint. I'm Hilma af Klint. And that's when I wrote her family, and I have a contact that I converse with. And they said, oh, that's the final picture of the Swan series. Like, oh, can you send me a print quality copy of that image? And like, yes. So I don't know why it doesn't get included. I need to ask that. So good question.
So again, if you have questions, you can use the little reaction button to raise your hand, or you can type it in the chat, and either way we'll call on you and get to your question.
And just comments too, just whenever you want to share your feelings or just what it evoked for you, anything, please share anything like that.
And you need to use the raise hand function because I can't see everybody in the window. There's enough people that there's 2 screens, or put in the chat, but there you go. Hi, Sarah, go ahead and unmute.
Hi, thank you so much for taking that question and answering it to the best of our knowledge. I did a study group with folks on Diane Sherwood's and Joseph Henderson's book, and I've just written Diane to ask where she or Joseph Henderson found that image, because it seems strange that it would have been in that book, and it's slightly different representation than the one you have on the screen from the book.
The one I got mine from, yeah, the family.
Yeah, she did too. Hers is apparently from the foundation.
Yeah,
but
the foundation.
Slightly different in the bottom portion of the picture. Anyway, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Appreciate everything.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Elisa, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. So I have a question and a comment, if that's okay. I was curious, Mary Beth, you said when Hilma was going through her cleansing process for a good year, that the family was upset about that. Can you speak more to that?
I just know a little bit about it, but what they intimated again in this film, because they actually interview family members, they just thought she was being odd. Like, why are you just eating vegetarian? Right? I can imagine at the dinner table, you're not going to eat the food we prepared for you. And is it healthy? Is it not good for you to do? They just thought she, was just being extreme, which she was in some ways, right? I mean, vegetarian is really common now, but again, it would kind of go with the theosophy because so much of that was influenced by Hinduism, Buddhism, right? As well as Christianity and other major religions. But she felt it was a way to purify herself and to really be a vessel for which, to receive this art commission. But they went along with it. They didn't like kick her out of the house or anything. But they just said, well, we thought it was unusual, but there's Hilma being unusual. Yeah.
Well, thank you for, teaching us about her. My comment was, of course, I've heard of Carl Jung, but it sort of breaks my heart. This is my first time learning about this woman, and talk about a person way ahead of their time. But I guess that just kind of speaks to misogyny and how prevalent it is in our culture. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Elisa. Diane, you have a question? Can you unmute, Diane?
Yes, I'm sorry. I just wanted to point out that the last image from the Swan series, the number 24, is also published in a book called Hilma af Klint, Painting the Unseen. And I believe that's a catalog from a show at the Serpentine Gallery in London in 2016. So I just thought that might be of interest to you. And in saying that also, thank you very much for a lovely lecture presentation and this weaving together of the work of Jung and Hilma. It's really quite beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Vanessa?
Hello. I would like to ask you what you think of the period of time waiting where her work wasn't seen by people. I'm just curious about also like Jung's Red Book and just the idea of what it means to have this period of time before her work is seen.
Yeah, I've contemplated that and wondered myself. Do you have any thoughts about it? I'll answer, but I'm just wondering, because you're asking it, it must be evoking something for you, and I'm wondering what that is.
Yeah, I think there are people ready for contemporary work. I think that there are people conscious enough to relate to it. And what I like about her work is the freshness of it. It seems the colors are so incredibly fresh, and this quality of, the symbolism as well is very refreshing. And I just think there were a lot of people at that time who probably would have related to it.
Yeah, I've spent some time contemplating because, when they first started writing about her in this, it was kind of like said, like, I don't know if somebody just made this up or, because then you get like art reviews and how newspapers often are, is they pick up what somebody else wrote and they use it as a foundation and kind of keep that content going. But it was like, oh yeah, that it would be that people would be more receptive to it later, which, I mean, look at the reception. We love it, right? She's like trying to show it. People were at the time, she had friends, female friends, and stuff going, what are you doing? Steiner was like, no, you can't show any of the work here. And she even wrote in that video, in that film, she wrote him and said, what should I do with these 10 largest if you won't show them anywhere? Should I just destroy them? But it was more of like a challenge. It wasn't really asking that. The tone was like, come on now, these have been called by the spirit, we're interested in this stuff. But it was also suggested in that film that she might have also, given how active she was in women's suffrage and that, I don't know if this is again, we can read into it or not, but also so kind of understanding the art world by waiting this long. She kept her art out of the like male, kind of at that point, male dominated art world in terms of the buying and selling of art. And so actually, I mean, I always ask the family if I can use the paintings, but when I had first asked them, they were like, I said, well, what do I need to pay you for usage? And they said, no, they're in the public domain because too much time passed. And now I did try to use the image recently to put on a cover of a book, and they wanted the gallery that they work with, which now has accepted her art and shows her art, the one originally in the 70s and said, we don't want anything to do with it. They wanted a few $1,000s, it was for a book where, it'd be sold and money would be made. But when it's for educational purposes, they say you can use it freely, which often is the case. But he also said it's more in the public domain. So there was this idea that somehow she was sidestepping, that whole art thing because they hadn't responded to her. So I don't know.
It doesn't sound like she was sidestepping.
Oh, right.
But I'm wondering what the group here thinks about the similarities with Jung's Red Book being under lock and key for so many years. Is there something similar in this?
Does anyone have some thoughts about that?
Rich, do you want to comment about that? Or
Yes, I would. I think it's a little different. Maybe there are similarities, but Jung kind of lost interest in that project around 1929, and he moved into alchemy. And he didn't know what to make of it. He did show it to patients, of course, colleagues, but he wasn't sure he wanted it to be seen in any real large way. That was a very conscious decision on his part. He even said, I don't want this to see the light of day until so many years after my death, which, the book was published in 2010, which roughly 50 years after his passing. I don't know if that's, maybe MARYBETH can comment on what Hilma's thoughts were about her work not being seen. But I know that Jung didn't want it seen.
Hilma wanted her work to be seen. That's what she wanted it. She tried to get it into exhibits, and it was constantly turned down, and they would only accept her landscapes. But she wanted her work to be seen. So it wasn't until the end of her life that she just boxed it up then and gave it to her nephew. Luckily, she got it all ready to go, because then she was hit by a car and killed. But she wanted her work to be seen. But I do think there is this thing that happens, and it was really interesting because I gave this talk Wednesday night at the LA Institute. It was 2 hours instead of 3 hours. 3 hours is lovely. But there's a woman from Australia in attendance Wednesday night, and she said the exhibit, a large exhibit of Hilma af Klint's work was in Australia, and then before it opened, the pandemic hit, and as we know, at least we've heard, that Australia stayed in lockdown much longer than the US. And so by the time they got out of lockdown, the time of the exhibit left. And so all the paintings were hanging in the museum and in Australia, I don't know what city, but no one could see them. And I woke up in the morning, first of all, her chagrin, because she was like, finally, went to my, presentation Wednesday night to finally see the images a little closer. And then I woke up just feeling, and perhaps this is what you're talking about, Vanessa, I just felt this, like the longing of us to see the work and the longing of the paintings to be seen.
Right.
And this vacuum of connection. The way, the paintings, and when I think about how they looked at the Guggenheim, I'm thinking about them being, displayed in this museum, and the halls are empty and they're waiting to have contact, because they were painted expressly to have human interaction, to, spur something in us and us to react with them. So I did get this sense, Vanessa, and I feel like the Red Book's like that too, even though he didn't intend it. But I think what you're picking up on is this longing. There's something palpable between these images and us that we, and then but somehow this space and time has to occur. I had a similar experience here in Palm Springs with Agnes Pelton exhibit. It started out in Phoenix. It was a 4-museum show. It traveled from Phoenix, and Agnes Pelton was a contemporary of Hilma af Klint, but she was an American, and she did abstract art and spiritual based art too. So it traveled from Phoenix. It was in Santa Fe at a museum there. And then also was at the Whitney in New York. And then it came to Palm Springs because she lived in the Palm Springs area and died here. And when it got to Palm Springs, they were all ready for it and displayed it, and that pandemic hit. But because we got out of lockdown, so I was able to see it. But again, it was this idea that these images, just like with the Red Book, it's just sitting there potent, this potential potency. So I don't know, Vanessa. Yeah, it's pretty interesting, isn't it?
Yes, and in Switzerland, there's a woman artist named Emma Kunz.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's interesting too, the similarities in what they're showing with their symbolism. And and I'm also thinking about the time. There are just so many connections that make it very lively, what she was bringing through. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for your point.
Yeah, thank you, Vanessa. I wanted to add before we go to the next person too, because I've done my own dissertation and research, this Red Book and some other artists. But one of the things that's interesting, the question of what is art. And at that time, Jung, of course, had this real discussion with this inner female, what is art, and kind of came down on, and in some ways, the patriarchal masculine sense of it. And I feel like part of what I will call the archetype of art is transformational, and what we're seeing about these images coming up in connection to, you could even say, an evolution of psyche and what art and creativity mean, not just a commodity, as you were talking about, MARYBETH, but it's a communication and dialogue and a connection that goes both individually and collectively, which I feel like, MARYBETH, you're really kind of demonstrating that through this presentation too. So thank you, Vanessa. And Patricia, you have your hand up. Would you like to unmute and turn on your video and ask your question?
Yes, hi. Can you see me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I actually don't have a question. I have a comment that I wanted to make in response to Vanessa's query. I think we have to remember that both of these people that we're discussing today were in touch with something much bigger than the political scene or the zeitgeist at the time. And I think that what's actually happening is we have an opening now in our psyche that can receive what these people were in touch with. And that's the longing, and that's the receipt that we're being given by these images. I also had studied Hilma af Klint before the Guggenheim, and discovered that Guggenheim was doing this, and immediately bought a ticket and flew myself to New York for the weekend just to be there at the same show that you saw, MARYBETH. And I just feel that the culture, the psychoid at large is ready to hear and receive the kind of connection between an individual and the transcendent that each of these people were in touch with. And Hilma wanted hers heard. And Jung had another agenda. He wanted to be regarded within the male patriarchy as an expert and a scientist. And you know, kind of missed the mark ultimately from a scientific point of view, but he was able to protect himself from a time that wasn't ready to hear. And I think we are more ready. Some of us are more ready to accept these kinds of communications as valid. That's all I wanted to say.
Beautifully stated, Patricia. Thank you.
Diane.
Yes, I just wanted to comment. It has been suggested that Hilma kept her work under lock and key, or desired that it would be kept that way, because the Second World War had not ended when she died, and she was worried about the Nazis and their destruction of what they called degenerate art. And she was afraid that her work would be destroyed as degenerate. This is just something that I read and would like to throw that in to the mix of the reasons why she put that, restriction on the work.
Thank you. I hadn't heard that. It's great. Like I said, it keeps evolving as we start getting access to her journals, and that we're going to get a lot more information, and we're going to find out all these different points.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Supriti?
Hi, everyone. I sent a question, but it only went to MARYBETH, so I'm just going to repeat that question.
Okay.
And it had to do with the Swan series. I just wanted to know if her entire opus is considered channeled, or and then the distinction between art and just the archetypes flowing through. I just wondered, is she doing both? Obviously, she's doing both, right?
Yeah. In terms of channeling, she did that from 1906 to 1915, or 1914, 1915. And then she was intentional, from then on.
Okay.
So the Swan series was intentional. She, for whatever reason, it came to her to work with the Swan. Again, I don't know if it was the cultural milieu of what was going on. It's been suggested about that, by art historians. But yeah, she was intentional then. But of course, since she's still working like any artist, like with what comes to
Through
her.
inspiration.
Yes.
Yeah. And I just want to share that I had the privilege of going to the exhibit in 2019, and I considered it a pilgrimage, and it was a really transcendent experience for me. It was both very personal and very universal. It was very intimate and very cosmic. So thank you for bringing the big pictures, to the screens, but it was nothing compared to be standing in front of them.
Right. And being in that building, right, together.
Yes.
It was a pilgrimage as we're all just climbing that spiral step or path, right, around her pictures.
It was wonderful
together.
to revisit it with the Jung connection.
Thank you.
Thank you. Melanie Higgins. You need to unmute, please.
Hi,
Hi.
can you hear me?
Yes.
So I lived in Germany for quite some time, and about 10 years ago, before I moved back to the States, I was reading or looking through a Vogue magazine, and I happened to find this.
Wow.
I happened to find this image, and I just was blown away by it. And so I went to a photography shop and asked them if they could do anything with it. And so they found, I don't know what they did, but anyway, they put it on a canvas. They found the image, and it's been in my house for the last 10 years. And I didn't know anything about her until I saw the ad for this this seminar, this webinar, and wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is really very synchronistic.
Definitely. Yeah. Oh, what a wonderful story.
Yeah, and thank you so much for adding to this.
Yeah,
broadening
definitely.
it. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. That's
Yeah.
incredible. And thanks for showing us it to us. Yeah, that's great. I love it.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you so much. Michelle.
I just want to say, I think it's interesting how art through history, it was so accepted to be divinely inspired if it was the mainstream religions. You know, but to say it's divinely inspired or from something a little less mainstream at the time, then it wasn't accepted. So I'm glad she's being recognized now for that.
Right, that's one of the points that's made in that video. They said, if you're really going to take mystical experience away, like think of all the artists and then the whole genre of, you know, religious art, which is called art. But also, you know, so many people were inspired by visions or painted visions they had. And why is it then that her work isn't art? You know, so yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I also just want to say there's some similarities to some of her art to the weavings that were being done at the Brew House at the time. I could see some of the on the more geometric ones. So I just, you know, find that interesting with Kandinsky and the timing and everything.
Right. Can you put that in the chat, the brew, how you spell that, so people want to look that up?
Okay.
Thank you. Making
Thanks,
that connection.
You know, it's interesting, Michelle, after you just said that, what all of a sudden came to mind too, Mary Beth, was both the Navajo weavings and the pottery and so forth, and the images here we see in the Pacific, I mean, in the Southwest, that have similar kind of sense, right? That again has not been seen as art because it is a spirituality of the indigenous, of the tribe. Yeah, making that point is quite interesting.
It is. And then there's been suggestions, again, with her study of theosophy, which studied, you know, Eastern and, you know, other religions, that abstract actually started with tantric art that was, you know, images, geometric forms, non-representational form, you know. And like, if you think about what those, the spirit guides look like, you know, Amaliel and that, if you look at, I had a student show me tantric art from India and that, and you see these forms and that. And so then you're talking about indigenous, that, you know, so there very well could have been, you know, suggestions, obviously, and with that and appropriation.
There's a question in the chat from Paula Miller, and she says, what could they have meant by, quote, lacks intentionality as a reason for not showing her art? Which seems like we're kind of covering some of that, but you might speak to that a little bit more.
I just think it's something, you know, the way I think about it is, I remember when I was in high school and electronic music was coming out, and there was all these questions about what's noise and what's music. And I just kind of go there in my mind, like, how do I understand, like, when this whole new abstract form emerged, I love abstract art and non-representational art. But for someone who had been used to, especially in dominant Western culture, you know, portraits, landscapes and stuff, and all of a sudden there's this new emergence and people are saying, this isn't art, or this is an abomination, or this is the representation of a chaotic mind, or, you know, there's just a lot of question about, you know, its validity. You know, now we hear music that, you know, noise, quote, what is noise? All these questions, right? You know, we're electronic music, different things like that. We're a lot more used to it. It's integrated into music we hear all the time. So I don't know, I'm not saying that's an exact parallel, but I just, when I think about it in my mind, what was it like for me when I heard something new and how did I react to it? When I hear a new genre, then sometimes I go, oh, how does that sound in my ear? So the same thing as what is it like to my eye? And then, I don't know, I think, you know, I don't know, I don't want to, you know, the other part where, you know, the art world and that, I don't know what it was, that they just didn't like this idea. It has to be that that it wasn't through mediumship. There's just this long history of bias against mediumship. In one of the papers that I got published, now I talk about how mediums were male and female. In fact, they think there were more male mediums than female. It did kind of start with some young women initially, but this is a quote. This is of the cultural prejudice towards female mediums at the time. This is by Lawrence Moore. He wrote a book about mediums, the history of mediumship. There's a quote: mediums were weak in the masculine qualities of will and reason, and strong in the female qualities of intuition and nervousness. This kind of sounds like not good, right? They were impressionable, to outside influence, and extremely sensitive. But most of all, they were passive. After all, what spirit could manifest anything through a medium who has their own personality that was strongly assertive? The success of spirit communication depended on the ability of mediums to give up their own identity to become the instrument of others. So, I mean, that's pretty negative, right? Some of that might be true. You might have to give up parts of yourself to allow this through, but that doesn't, actually, I think it takes a stronger personality to not go mad, right? So you have to be able to hold that capacity to keep your own sense of self while there's something else flowing through you that's not your normal state of consciousness. So I know there's just, that's a question that it's just is being debated right now. I'd love to debate this question you've asked.
Thank you. Sylvia. Okay, so Vanessa.
I was just thinking about the direct relationship to Sonia Delaunay or Robert Delaunay with the circles, or Jasper Johns, also, wartime, he came out of that. But, the imagery, this circle imagery is just so beautiful. And it just struck me throughout art history that, she's right in there with the beginning of the abstraction and how it's been repeated. I mean, maybe I'll have to look up the dates of Delaunay's circles, but it's pretty close.
Is it?
Visually, yes.
Hi, Sylvia. Thank you, Vanessa.
Hello.
Hello.
We decided, I mean, many things have been said, and I find myself doing this a lot, what everyone shared. And I want to thank you so much for this presentation. And what I wrote down in the first moment is becoming whole in a world as it is. And I find what was shared today with from you and from all of us and from Hilma is the first glimmer of hope I have felt in a while, honestly. That art is what saves me. That's what I want to share. So it's very personal. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'm moved by that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Go ahead, MARYBETH.
I was going to say, if there's no more questions, we could just look at the images again, go through them.
Diane just raised her hand. Diane.
Okay, Diane.
I was just going to say that Dostoevsky said that beauty could save the world. So that was a response to Sylvia's comment about art. So I just wanted to throw that in. I thought it was important.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Diane. Okay, yes. Go ahead if you want to.
Okay. Oh. Sorry, I have to do this. Okay. gosh. All right, so this is the 10 largest. So I'll just go through, but if you want to say something, just unmute yourself and share. I'm gonna flip through this and get to the series again. The historian Fisher said about Hilma af Klint's work, we all believe the universe consists of atoms and that these atoms determine the universe. But it is, he thinks Hilma af Klint's saying it is the other way around. Because she is also saying she's building the universe from her inner self while also receiving the signals she needs from the universe to create new forms where she shows us as atoms. And then in Hilma's own words, she wrote, "You must learn to ignore your fear, for without the will to believe in yourself, nothing good will happen." She definitely ignored her fear. I wouldn't say she was fearless. She lets us know she was filled with fear. And I was just talking about this yesterday. My fear to make change, my fear to let go, sometimes my fear to move from one state to another. And yet that's when often we're most alive. So we must learn to ignore our fear, for without the will to believe in ourselves, nothing good will happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary Beth. This was so rich. There's so much here, so much to see, think about, digest, and because you've digested it, you brought it to us in a very fluid and easy pace, and that took some real work on your part, and I really appreciate it. I think we all appreciate it. I thank you for your scholarship and for bringing this deep and very bright spirit, Hilma af Klint, to us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's
Come
been a
on
really
back.
pleasure to be with all you. Thank you.
We can have you in person.
Oh,
At
I
some-
wanted to be in person. I was really looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but
Yeah, I know.
But folks will be in person in the fall, barring unforeseen madness. So look for our brochure. If you don't get the brochure and you want to, you can type your snail mail address in the chat and we'll send you one. Otherwise, check the website in August and you'll see the year schedule and what we have in line for next year. Thank you all for showing up today. Thank you, Lisa, for your great expertise on that Zoom side of things and all that you do. Thanks
Thank you.
again.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Mary Beth. Thank you, Rich. And thank you everyone for here. And again, let's all bring in some rain energy to northern New Mexico. Until next time.
Bye.
You.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.